All right, well, hello everyone and welcome to Worksighted Next. Today we'll be talking again about Microsoft Teams. If you've watched one of our webinars before, you'll note that we often use Microsoft Teams live events for these webinars. Today, since we're going to be having a panel discussion, we elected to use Zoom due to being able to have multiple presenters on screen on feed at one time. So here at Worksighted, we always believe in using the right tool for the right job. So we're going to have a Q&A function. Go ahead and submit your questions. We'll answer them as we go along if they're relevant to the question at the time, but we'll make sure to have time at the end of the webinar to get to every question. We will also have a recording of this webinar available, and we'll email it out to you. It will also be on our YouTube channel. Yes, we do have a YouTube channel, and you can find that by just searching Worksighted on YouTube. And we have a lot of other great videos on there as well. And if you want to learn more about Microsoft Teams, you can head over to worksighted.com/Microsoft-Teams and find a lot of great content that can help you with your adoption of Microsoft Teams. So while here at Worksighted, we've had our own journey with Microsoft Teams, and we have also helped a lot of other organizations adopt Microsoft Teams and learn how to use that as a tool. We've had a number of clients that we would call early adopters, and we thought it might be interesting to you, our audience, to hear from them directly. So today, we will be having a conversation on the topic of Teams, how these organizations have found success with the tool. And here with me today is Ann Puckett from Grand Rapids Community Foundation and Richard Campbell from Disher. Both organizations were using Teams prior to the COVID-19 crisis, and we thought this would be a good opportunity for you to hear firsthand why Teams has been useful for them and how they're using it. So let's learn a little bit more about our guests first and their organizations. Ann, can you share with us a little bit about you and Grand Rapids Community Foundation and why you chose to adopt Microsoft Teams?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today, Adam. And I work for the Grand Rapids Community Foundation, and I've been there for the past 18 years. And our foundation gives grants and scholarships to the community. I'm in IT, and I'm thankful for our relationship with Worksighted to help me do my job. And so we're going to talk about how.
Yeah, how, I guess, Richard, if you want to go next.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Disher and what you do with them.
Yeah, you bet. Name's Richard Campbell. We've partnered with Worksighted really since inception, I believe. A little bit about Disher. Disher is really an organization that we deliver innovative solutions in engineering, manufacturing, and we also do talent attraction and do talent services through many different functions. My career at Disher, I've been there a little over 9 years. I primarily lead a product development team, but I'm also the technology lead for Disher, although I don't really have any formal education in IT. It's not only a passion, but it's something that I do for Disher. And then lastly, really, I'm a Holland native. I've been here since '89. Have 4 kids, and my wife has transitioned from working home or working as a teacher to also now teaching our 4 kids at home. So,
yeah, that's something a lot of other parents are learning to deal with right now as well. One question that came up is the size of the organizations, and I think you said that GRCF has about 30 staff and give about 13 million annually.
Yep. So we have 30 staff, so we're a smaller organization. Yep.
Mm-hmm. But you do a lot of collaboration, both internally, but with a lot of other outside organizations as well. And then Richard,
exactly.
could you tell us a little bit about how Disher's and its size?
Sure. For us, it's a little different. We've got both core team members, and we also have an extended network of people. And that fluctuates, based on project load. So we've got about 123 core team members. We carry some interns along the way as well, but our DEN or our extended network staff fluctuates anywhere from right now pretty low to as many as 40 or 50 extended network employees at a given moment.
Yeah, and very geographically diverse as well. I mean, a lot of times your staff are all over the place, right?
Yes, absolutely. And even outside of the United States, we've worked with extended network folks over in Great Britain, Hungary, China, and other places.
Okay. All right. So I got a couple questions here about your adoption with Teams, and I'll start with you, Anne. When did you start with Teams? How long have you been using it?
So I'd like to think we're an early adopter, and so we've been using it for about 2 years now, which started with a need for document collaboration. And I said, hey, there's this new tool out there. Why don't we test this out? So we did, and it quickly caught fire. And we shortly thereafter implemented it organizationally wide within small groups of people.
Kind of a staggered adoption.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then Richard, how about you? How long have you been using it?
I'd say since like 4th of July of last year is really kind of when we started to make the transition into Teams. Before that, we were kind of on a path of rolling out SharePoint and to try and lighten some of our on-premise file and infrastructure. But two things kind of happened. We were, some of the Skype for Business stuff is coming to an end here shortly. So we were needing to make a transition for online collaboration tools. But pretty quickly noticed the benefits of some of the Teams side of collaboration for not only some of our internal type projects, but also some of our customer type projects as well.
Yeah, and that's something I've talked about before, that there's really kind of a couple different main areas of function in Microsoft Teams. You have the chat and online meetings capabilities, and then you also have the Teams itself, as well as file sharing. And it sounds like, and something we've run into with a lot of other organizations, is the impetus to adopt Teams may have really started in one of those areas, but then realizing maybe we want to expand into these other functions. And that's kind of part of what this conversation about, is to help people understand, even if they've started using Teams, what are the benefits potentially of using those other areas as well. And the Skype for Business end of life was obviously a huge driver for a lot of organizations as well. So I think that takes me kind of to the next section, where I want to talk about how you're using Teams in your organization and how you started, and then maybe what that journey has been. So Richard, I'll start with you on this in terms of how did you roll out Teams? How did you message it to your users? Any challenges or things you did well that helped with that?
Sure. Well, like I said, around the 4th of July last year is really when we were using SharePoint. We had migrated a lot of our on-premise corporate information into the SharePoint environment, and then we started to convert those into Teams and roll them out to a lot of our users. We took kind of a gentle approach, and the first thing to go was our human resource environment, and that was something that, as you can imagine, with personal protection of information, we needed some very granular permissions and controls for a lot of our coaches and approvers. So we moved that over to the SharePoint environment first, and then eventually into Teams. The second piece to go for us was really a lot of our corporate information. So we've got kind of two sides to our business. One of them is our breadth of solutions, which is really a lot of the solutions and services that we offer outside of the organization. And then our corporate steward areas, which are a lot of our internal things, a lot of our internal initiatives. We're a very stewardship focused organization. So we've got a lot of things, especially right now with the COVID-19, we've got a lot of initiatives that we're doing both internally and externally to really kind of help with what's going on right now.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common need a lot of organizations have is to figure out where do we put like standard documents or standard forms, internal kind of corporate documents that everybody needs access to. And seems to be a pretty easy win in Teams adoption is to have like an all company group and have standardization as to where people can go to access that information.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
And I'll go ahead.
Let me just add one. So kind of as a result of all of this, we were pretty well structured that way with the human resource environment and our company portal, but we weren't planning on rolling out some of the customer projects in SharePoint and Teams until next year, because our adoption rate for SharePoint and Teams was good, but it maybe wasn't as good as what it should be really for us to kind of roll in and do customer side things and then open up Teams to externally. But we did that right away as kind of the shelter in place order came about. We've got, I think, 4 projects in there right now, and they've been very successful. And that level of collaboration for customer projects has really opened everybody's eyes to the power of Teams and what it could really do for us going forward.
Yeah, I think that's something that seems to be pretty universal across our experience as well, is that there may have been an adoption plan, but the COVID-19 crisis and remote work requirements really elevated and escalated that. So, and I'll ask you the same thing, you know, how did you roll it out and challenges that you had?
So fortunately for us, we rolled it, started 2 years ago. So I feel like we were ahead of the curve. And so we first focused on our departments and committees, and we wanted to see or focus on a couple of things. How can we continue our paperless journey? And also, how can we reduce inbox overload?
Right.
And so the biggest challenge we faced with all of this was change management. I would say we had about 50% of staff was on board 100%. And then we had 50% of staff that really were resisting the change. They felt like they were having to go to multiple places to look for things. They love Outlook. They had all their little folders set up. So we definitely had to continuously work on messaging and how this tool was valuable and how it can actually make their work more efficient. I would say, though, obviously, when we flipped the switch, as my president likes to say, she was one of the resistors, but now she is one of my big champions, right? And she totally is on board and sees the value and is very grateful that we did start this journey much further along than others. And so I did some statistics just to give a little idea. So in the past 90 days, we had 14,465 chat messages. However, approximately 50% of that was in the last 30 days. So you could see how pre-COVID-19, the curve went right up there. So that was an interesting trend to see.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, you can go into the Teams Admin Center, and there's usage reports in there that are really useful. Most of the client environments that I've worked with and looked at in that regard prior to that were starting that adoption, you saw chat messages, Teams messages, active Teams, and then all of a sudden within weeks, it just week on week would grow and grow and grow. And I think that challenge that you called out of another place to go for information is kind of a common concern, and rightfully so, one that I had as well when we started adopting it. Because if you still have to do everything else that you normally did, you still had to deal with the same volume of emails, and now you have to go and look elsewhere to get critical information. That can be challenging. And so what we found is that for chat, for example, once everybody in the organization is using the Teams app, has it on their laptop or desktop, has it on their phone, then all of a sudden you get this great value increase because multiple people can, it's like a de facto way to get a hold of people quickly. And then once the organization figures out the communication strategy and what kind of information is going to go into Teams and people can understand that, then it helps them to understand where do I go for what. And over time, it seems like you get to where Teams is almost all of your internal communication, and email becomes the way that you interact with truly outside people. And as you increase your adoption of Teams, of working and collaborating with your frequent external collaborators, even that communication starts to move into Teams. So I think with that said, understanding, I think that aspect of it, the primary use cases, the way that you're using it within your organization. If we talk about the video conference and meetings versus instant messaging, company channel communication, file sharing, I think what would be interesting to me and maybe our viewers would be like, what did you start with and where you went from there? So Richard, I'll start with you on that. And I think we talked a little bit about this, but if you want to go into a little more depth on the timeline of those functions.
Yeah, go ahead. What was the question again, Adam?
Oh, what did you start with kind of as your primary ways that you were using Teams? And you know, what have you adopted if we look at like video conferencing meetings versus instant message, company channel communication, file sharing? Was it all together at once, or did you start with certain functions in terms of how you messaged and trained users?
Yeah, I mean, our first kind of lean into Teams was pretty light. It was mostly for collaboration, person-to-person type communication, and Teams type meetings as part of some of those internal initiatives and some of those external, and now especially with some of those external projects.
Mm-hmm. So really started more with the chat and meetings functionality. And I remember we did some training events with you and kind of focused on the whole thing, but I think that was the big area that most people's questions were around, was initially was how this replaces Skype for Business. And then they started thinking and using it for the other functions as well as for teams themselves and things like that.
Yep, that's correct.
So Anne, how about you? What were the primary ways you started with Teams, and then what did that rollout and adoption process look like?
So initially it was mostly for document collaboration, but also a way to, once again, go on that paperless journey where rather than printing agendas and meeting minutes, we were storing it all within these teams and channels that we created. So people could just, our staff could just go there and find what they need versus looking for an email, printing it off. And so that was just part of our journey. And some chat, but mostly document collaboration and meeting collaboration.
So really, you started using it more on almost the Teams and channels functionality first before like it as an instant messaging platform for your whole organization.
Well, more to start having those conversations outside of email for internal staff.
Gotcha. Okay. Did you use like online meeting functionality as much from the beginning, or no?
No, not at all. Because we're 30 staff, we were mostly all working in-house until about a year ago when we did get one full-time staff who was working remotely. So
did that start, like the online meetings start with that staff member, or would you say that it really didn't kick off until this COVID-19 crisis?
Oh, it started with that staff person for sure. I mean, there was some people who still work remotely, so we did it a little bit off and on, but once this one person went offline, so to speak, it really ramped that up. So which was a great ad hoc training, right, for staff prior to COVID-19. Yeah.
Yep.
So along that way, I guess if we look under the optimization category, you know, what did you do after you started that journey to continue to refine how you were adopting it, or change your messaging, or focus on those next features? And I'll start with you on that one.
Okay. So, you know, one thing that at our foundation, at the Grand Rapids Community Foundation, we really like to emphasize education and training. And so part of the optimization included ongoing training with staff and learning how we could be more efficient. And some of those tools that were available, we started to migrate to, such as Planner. So we were using other project management tools, but we decided we wanted to stay within the Office 365 stack to make things a bit more efficient. And so we started, the next phase was mostly seeing how we could utilize some of those tools such as Planner and To Do.
So you said you were doing training along the way, kind of tips and tricks. Did you have any sort of cadence or frequency that you focused on with that?
I did. It was either based on need, if I saw a lot of support requests coming in, or a new feature, then I would, but mostly probably I would say once a week, or twice a month, just to try to once again keep the management of how often people are getting communication. But I also created a tech tips channel.
So you created a channel in your like all company group.
Yep, in the all company group, rather than emailing everyone like I would. I just said, hey, if you want to learn the latest and greatest, making it a reason for people to come to Teams, right? So well, you have to have a purpose for it. And so I felt that was a great way to for people to get that information.
Gotcha. Okay, Richard, how about you? I mean, did you find any lessons you learned after the first month or two? What did you do to kind of optimize your adoption of Teams?
Well, we did a few things. So rather than giving everybody everything, we kind of drilled it down with a couple pilot groups. We kind of drilled it down to the tools as part of Teams and or SharePoint that we really wanted to make available to everybody right away. And then we kind of locked down some of those other tools so that it wasn't too much at one time for our user base. With the large number of folks that we had and as distributed as we normally are, we're, you know, Monday through Thursday, we kind of joke about it, but we don't. But Monday through Thursday, prior to COVID-19, we were typically on site with most of our customers. Now, that's not necessarily the case, and who knows what it'll be going forward. So we needed to make training available to everybody, and we've done that in a few ways. We've had in-session type training opportunities, bring your own laptop and kind of work through some things. And then as of course those teams kind of got rolled out and permissions were assigned, we had working sessions where, you know, from 2 to 4 Tuesdays and Thursdays for the next few weeks, you could just pop in and we could work through things together, or if there was permissions issues that needed to be resolved, or if you just needed a hand to better understand Teams, it's kind of just an open session, and they could just drop in and we could work through things individually, or even a couple times whole teams came in and said, hey, this is how we need to be able to use our Teams environment. Can it be done with the way it's currently configured, or could we maybe change it a little bit so that it serves our purposes better?
Right, and I think that's a standard standard request that we're seeing is that people start to use it in a certain way, and then they see the other functionality that's there, or they hear of somebody else using it, or even internally they may see somebody else who's a little bit more of like a leader in it, who's like, oh, here, you know, access this file this way, or, you know, I'm using Planner this way. And so then they start going, could we do that? How would this help us? And start to extend maybe just that group or that department's use of it. And I think there's a lot of potential moving forward on that. And I think I'll return to ask you a little bit more about Planner later. And I guess my next question is really, where do you see it going from here? What are your future ideas on where to go with it? You know, what's the next challenge for you with Teams? Richard, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, you know, like I mentioned earlier, we didn't plan on rolling out customer projects in Teams yet, but that's really kind of where we're headed. Not only right now, we're still operating on those internally only. They're not externally focused yet, but we all see as we work in that environment, with us being even more distributed than we were before, how advantageous having that is for us as a team. But quite often our teams consist of not only our internal engineers, or project management, or, I mean, you name the service, but quite often we're embedded with those customers, and being able to expand that even further and offer guest access into Disher's teams environments if they don't have one of their own is really kind of where we're headed. And then the other side of things for us, not only internally, because we've deployed some of these already, is kind of leaning into the Power Platform and some of the business intelligence, not only for us as a business, but also being able to provide that as a service to our customers.
So by that, you mean, for those that may not know, there's Power Automate, Power Apps, and Power BI. Power Automate is kind of an if this, then that type platform where you can set up workflows. Power Apps is kind of a no code or super light code app development platform. And then Power BI is a business intelligence platform. So, you know, when you say, if you want to just give a quick example of how you're using that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. If I can figure out how to share my screen here, I'll pull one up. So this one is one that is actually being ran out of SharePoint. If I can find it here. So prior to having some of these very powerful tools available to us, year after year, setting IT budgets was a challenge because we didn't have a really good heartbeat on where our assets were in their live stream. So, but after Power BI, once we got all this data in here, we had a very good visual as to kind of where in the life cycle of an asset's kind of fell, as well as, you know, where it was in its life cycle as well. So as far as warranty, we like to carry all of our equipment under warranty, but sometimes they fall out of warranty. But once we saw that, you know, as we transitioned from 2019 to 2020, we had a very good visual picture of what assets were needing to be retired and which assets needed to be replaced. So this is just one example of many that we not only created a Power BI visual, but on the back end for us to use, and we've extended that on to Worksighted as well. We've got the ability to manage all these as well. So, you know, if you could imagine this asset, this is a very old asset, but as it gets retired, we can very easily come in here and edit the status of that asset and change it to a salvaged asset. And then what happens, we use Power Automate to take that, and I've got some code written so that if one of these assets changes status from, you know, being in use or available to a salvage type state, an email automatically gets generated and sent to not only our finance department, but also to a few other users at Disher so that they can take that off of our asset ledger.
And you're using a combination of SharePoint, Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Apps really to make this. This wasn't an off-the-shelf app, right?
Correct.
Excellent. All right, so I think, Anne, if you want to take a stab at the kind of the next steps for GRCF with teams and what you guys are looking at.
So being a community foundation, we are a very collaborative organization with our community and nonprofit organizations and business partners. And so as you can imagine, COVID-19 is really probably for at least a good while going to change how we work. And I foresee this becoming you're muted. I foresee this becoming a much more utilized product for how we do our work, where people will really think, okay, do I need this to be in an in-person meeting? Could I set up an external team? Because right now we are using the product also to collaborate with some of our vendors. And that has worked really well on some of our projects. And we may, see ourselves doing that more often than having in-person meetings, where I think people will appreciate that. Also could be much more efficient as well. And so I see that, post COVID-19, also looking at how we can keep more of our tools within the Office 365 tool stack. And I'm already looking at, okay, do we need Basecamp? Do we need to use Google Forms? Do we need SurveyMonkey, and reevaluating all these applications that we currently have in our cloud stack and possibly bringing them more into the Office 365 environment.
Yeah, and there can be a lot of advantages to that, from whether you're extending your security, measures that you've put in place, or cost savings. Oftentimes Microsoft may not have the most fully featured capabilities in any one area, but it's enough for a lot of organizations and how they need to use that, and typically is improving as well. So one area that I was excited to kind of talk to you guys about is what the impact has been, whether that's potentially specific about remote work, but what have you seen as both a benefit, or even if there's negatives that you've had to adopting Microsoft Teams? And Richard, do you want to answer that first here?
Sure.
Can I interrupt, Adam? I just noticed there's questions. Do we want to answer any of these questions, or are we going to wait till the end?
The ones that are in there right now, I think we'll hit at the end.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. So for Disher, prior to us adopting Teams, we were using Skype for Business a lot for communication, whether it's person to person or person to group or group to group communication. But especially prior to the COVID-19, it was groups of less than 10 or 12, maybe 15 on the outbounds of that. But now for our Friday staff meeting, we've got 120 to 130 people connecting every Friday in a meeting. And I'm not sure that Skype would have handled that very well, or even if it could even handle that very well. But those meetings go very, very well. And we're just starting to test out some live meetings a couple times here and there, and kind of see where that's a good fit for us as well.
Yeah, that's I think probably a kind of a common, at least in this remote work, the ability to have all staff meetings and department meetings and one-on-ones has been a pretty big benefit. And I'm assuming that's really been driven a lot because of this crisis. But Anne, I'm curious the same, your usage has been a little bit longer. What impact or what improvements or effects have you seen from adopting Teams? And then how did that change with COVID-19 as well?
Well, like I said earlier on, we had some staff who were all on board, and we had some staff who were the outliers, I like to say. Yep. But, having this already in place is really assisted us very well with moving to a virtual workforce, where we've always been very rarely did we have people working remotely. And so we went very quickly from just almost 100% in office to 100% outside of the office. But they were able to see that we were pretty easily able to make that switch fairly painlessly. And so I think the overall impact, had we not had Teams, we would have still been able to do it, but it would have been a patchwork of applications we would have had to put together, and people had to go here for this and here for that. And it's really nice that we're able to keep it under one umbrella, and it's just so much user-friendly for staff. And I think we would have seen a lot of disconnect from staff who would have been hesitant to try all these different tools and feel a little bit intimidated. And I think with the user friendliness, that's really helped our adoption very well. And people who normally would have been stragglers, I see them really just, you know, going full force with teams and doing really, really well.
They're all in.
They're all in.
Yeah, I think, Richard, would you say the same in terms of the unifying platform has been powerful to help make sure that everybody feels more connected?
Definitely. You know, we don't even have a lot of the call plan and stuff turned on as far as Teams. There's a few of us that are using it, but even the messaging capabilities, if somebody's unavailable, to have kind of like a visual voicemail and then have it convert to text and searchable even. Just kind of having all of that really tied together has been huge for Disher.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, we could probably have a whole webinar about that topic of unified communications. And so there's some questions about that that we'll get to. But, you know, it's interesting because some of our client organizations had on-prem phone systems with phones at everyone's desk. And, you know, in retrospect, we're paying a lot of money for those, regardless of what system it is. If you total everything up, the phone service, the maintenance, everything else. And in many cases, they're doing nothing. They've done nothing for them or provided little to no value for the organization over the past weeks and months. And, you know, some people have, well, we don't have a phone system. But in some ways, Teams is that for a lot of organizations, because almost all peer-to-peer internal calling, and in some cases, client meetings have shifted to being taking place in Teams. And so you can't say that, well, it is your phone system, but it's certainly taken over a lot of what would have been done over the phone system traditionally. Let alone the fact that you do have the ability to add full phone system capabilities potentially as well. So I think that takes us to kind of our last area, and then we'll get to questions as well, would be things that you specifically did to get your users excited about it. I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything else you wanted to add in terms of, you know, how you, particular things that you felt were key to your success with Teams. And Richard, if you have anything in that regard you want to add.
Sure, you bet. Well, I'd say, you know, we got kind of two sides of our business, the breadth of solutions and the corporate steward areas. And you could even split off human resources as even a third one. But we started with one of those areas. We started out with the breadth of solutions area, and which is our externally facing services that we offer. We really identified some leaders in those areas to kind of be our pilot group and help us understand how our services side of the business really needs to be able to work and operate in Teams. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we created as a blueprint to kind of roll out those Teams environments. And then from there, we took a lot of those best practices and then we moved it over to our internal side of our business, which is the corporate steward areas, and used kind of that to help build out that side. And then a lot of those people that we used through that pilot phase were our champions, kind of leaning into the next phase. We did it in phases for sure, but we kind of identified who those champions were along the way. So it was kind of a train the trainer kind of approach, which really, really helped us.
Yeah, I think the champions, and you probably echo that, but it's important to get people that are really the ones that will help create that organic adoption and help answer those questions, because, you know, no one person can be there for every time somebody has a question that comes up. So I'd ask you the same, you know, is that one of the areas that you've seen success, and are there other things that you've done that you think were really helpful or instrumental to you being successful?
Yep. So like Richard, we also did create champions. So those who were really fond of Microsoft Teams, I would ask them to share tips and tricks and get other users excited with what they're doing, or we'd have a training and I'd co-present with someone else in staff. I also believe in bribes. No, not really bribes, but I would do rewards and gift cards, and, you know, when people attended trainings, or give them little, you know, badges that, you know, they're doing a great job. I know it seems little, but people really like that those little things. They really getting people excited, you know. Incentive. Thank you, Richard. Incentive.
Yeah.
So
Bribes works also.
incentives.
Any particular ones that you did that you thought was it giveaways or?
Yeah, you know, I would do a lot of that, little giveaways and stuff, just have people watch some videos and answer some quizzes, and, you know, do a raffle. So any of those little types of things. And a lot of the items, I would go to conferences and grab all the goodies at the tables, and then those would be my giveaways. All right, say, hey, Worksighted, what do you got that I could give away?
Yeah, that's great.
Regifting.
Yes, regifting.
All right, so I think we have a fair amount of Q&A questions we want to get to here. So I think the last question that I'd have for you guys really is, what advice would you give to other organizations? You know, Richard, what would you say you would tell somebody that if they're thinking about adopting teams, what they should think about?
I don't think that there's just one thing. I would say that there's a few things that we learned along the way that I would definitely bend somebody's ear a little bit, and, you know, maybe say, don't do it this way, because we learned kind of the hard way. One of them was because we took the SharePoint route into Teams. You know, we built out all on-prem AD security groups for kind of those permissions and those permission structures in SharePoint, and that ended up causing us a lot of grief when we wanted to convert from SharePoint into a Teams environment.
Sure.
Had we created Office 365 groups for all those people, our life would have been a lot easier, and we wouldn't have to redo a lot of those permission structures once we wanted to make the Teams switch. So that would be definitely one of the things that I would tell people, is to, if you're going to move into the cloud Teams environment, or even cloud SharePoint environment, lean more heavily towards Office 365 groups and Office 365 permissions, and less on-prem.
Yeah, that's kind of a general theme, which is that you don't want to necessarily recommit efforts into the on-prem infrastructure, whether that's even storing files, right? Like if somebody was looking at doing a new file share, I wouldn't recommend that you create that on the server right now. You know, you would really want to evaluate if you could put that in the cloud right off the get-go.
Absolutely.
Anything else you wanted to add to that, and you want to answer that question next year in terms of what advice you'd give to companies?
So mine would be two. One is continuous education, and two is governance, probably governance and then education. But so prior to rollout, you really want to have a plan of how you will manage your environment, who will be the team owners, who is responsible for creating channels, who's responsible for document retention, where are your final documents going to be stored, and how you will continuously keep that updated and maintained. And then two is education. Don't just roll this out and then walk away. They're continuously updating features. Every week I'm learning something new. And I think, and then I share that with staff, as, you know, it makes sense. And it also creates an excitement. Or they're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Or I was, you know, I had this workaround, or I didn't even know they can work in teams. So I just really want to emphasize, you need to make sure you are educating yourself so you can educate others.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, that may be as simple as fun things like the backgrounds that recently became available. But obviously there are some larger strategic things that are either have been implemented or will be implemented. Private channels is one that was a much requested feature that was implemented earlier this year. And if you need to understand how those work to use them effectively. So keeping up to date, keeping yourself educated on Teams, I think is a really good advice to give for sure.
3x3 coming down the road is an example of that, right, Adam?
Yep, exactly. Another big one that we'll be talking about in the near future will be tasks in Teams. That's kind of a rebranding, relabeling on Planner and furthering that integration. I think that's going to be really a game changer for a lot of organizations. As an aside, something that I found really fascinating going into the remote work requirements is we had a ton of work across lots and lots of organizations in Michigan to help them on the technical readiness side. Some of which were, they were much more set up than others, but regardless, the technical readiness for remote work was kind of a differentiator for businesses. But another differentiator was how well prepared were you for understanding what people were doing, workforce utilization, efficiency, who's assigned what, and how much work is that going to take. In the technology space, it's almost kind of an advantage as a service provider. We have ticketing systems and timesheets and projects and all of these constructs in our software that we have to be putting our time utilization into. And that actually really was more of an advantage than we realized, because we run into a lot of companies who don't know what people are doing, and they're starting. I think the worst direction to go down is to say like, oh, can we put software and track what people are doing on their laptops at home or things like that. I think it's more of a root issue. If you thought people sitting in seats in the office meant that they were doing what they needed to do, and that was the only way you could track that, that was a bad system in the first place. So these platforms, and there's certainly others like Mondays and other systems that you can use to try to get an understanding of what people are doing and where they're putting their time into. That can be a big advantage for your organization. So any last items before we get to Q&A? Any additional input or feedback on Teams itself? What you'd like to see or things that you would recommend people implement? Sounds like no. I think that's Q&A time. So Rebecca is going to moderate this part, ask the questions. I will try and answer them or ping them over to you guys. If you feel like if there's anything you want to add to those, feel free to let me know. So take it away.
All right. So the first one we have is we just started using Teams as we moved to working from home last month. For unified communications, we use Cisco, including Jabber. Obviously, there's some overlap between Jabber and Teams in terms of chat, presence, etc. Does anyone have experience with moving from Jabber to Teams? Can Teams be integrated with UC environments in terms of call presence and so on?
So that's a good question, but fairly specific as well. I don't know if either of you have used Jabber before. I certainly wasn't a Jabber power user prior to this. I know there are some organizations that have made that shift on a much larger scale. Spectrum Health is one, for example, that was using Jabber widely across their organization, and then within the last year migrated to Microsoft Teams. UC is an interesting term, unified communications, because it's really meetings, chat, presence, and phone calls. And I would argue that Teams is probably one of the most comprehensive UC platforms that I've seen, in that it ties into your email environment as well. I've seen a lot of organizations struggle when adopting things that are called UC, but really only using some of the capabilities because it's not, feature leaders in those other areas. I would say that to me, the advantages are that integration into the rest of the Office 365 platform, extending that security environment that you may have around SharePoint files, file synchronization. It can end up being a lot more robust file environment, file sharing and file collaboration environment. Putting those files in, such as Office files, in Office 365 storage like SharePoint immediately gives you benefits like multi-user editing and auto saving and things along those lines. So they're definitely competitors. Both Teams and Jabber Jabber was made as an add-on to an existing phone system, so to speak, Cisco phone systems. And then Teams, it's almost the other way. It started as kind of the UC tool, focused more on the meetings and chat and everything else. But you can also add full phone system capabilities onto it in terms of having external calls coming in and being able to place external calls and having a desk phone and everything else. But certainly Jabber is a very full-featured platform, and we wouldn't necessarily be able to go into all of the features, but that might be a good webinar topic in the future, is kind of comparing the different UC platforms out there. So hopefully that helps. I know that wasn't a clear answer, but
kind of a similar question. Somebody asked about using Slack. They're currently using Slack, but looking to migrate to Teams. Do you have any immediate selling points for moving to Teams? I think document storage is the main benefit. So maybe a quick answer to that. Let's do some rapid fire question answering, because we've got about 10 more to go.
Yeah, I would say document storage is a big one, but having meetings combined and instant message combined is probably, it is more unified, certainly. And it has the potential to extend into more of your user's day, right? Again, it's not about creating new tools, new places, and having now another additional place to go, but that Teams can start to become a more condensing place where you can go to communicate with people and collaborate on files.
Yep.
How about kind of similar in terms of unified communications? Can you expand on using Teams for full phone usability? Maybe a quick answer to that, because I know it can get really complicated.
Yeah, so Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and Teams, there's Teams Voice. There are plans that you can add on. And one thing I'd quick touch on would be, for a lot of organizations out there, probably most relevant would be the new Microsoft Business Voice, Microsoft 365 Business Voice that became available. There are enterprise capabilities that are a little bit more a la carte, but it's a simple $20 bundle that you can add on that gives you full phone system capabilities. So that means every user can have a DID number. You can place external calls. People can call you directly. You can have a desk phone that is fully capable and fully featured. You have an audio conferencing capability that's added to that. You can have auto attendance and call queues and all of those kind of capabilities in the cloud platform. So it's really like a lot of other cloud phone systems that you would see out there, RingCentral, 8x8, Vonage, et cetera. But it can be all in that interface. So you're using the same app for Teams on your phone for voice calls as you are for calls with your colleagues and meetings and everything else. Either of you have anything you want to add to that?
I'm a call plan user already, and it's got some tangible and some intangible benefits that come along with it. One of the intangibles is you're not giving out your cell phone number. So when you go away on vacation, it doesn't necessarily have to ring your cell phone while you're trying to spend time with family. It can be set to not ring through to you before business hours or after business hours, and it'll go direct to voicemail. From there, it'll be converted to text, and from there, it'll either send you a Teams message or send you an email, and you can choose whether or not it's something that you need to respond to immediately or wait until the next day. So there's some very tangible and intangible benefits to moving over from a traditional type PBX phone system to, and even divorcing individual cell phone plans or even a corporate cell phone plan versus I just use the Teams app on my cell phone and it rings and works just as good as just a cell phone type call. And you can instantly switch between just a voice call to a video call. We've got people that are out on the manufacturing floor all the time with our customers, and if they need to grab some more of our guys back at the office and say, hey, look at this.
Right, add more people to the call, things like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as long as they've got a good signal, either cellular or if they're on the Wi-Fi of the customer that they're at, they can have a video call right then and right there.
Yep. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. One more or next one?
Yeah. So what level or license is needed to use live meetings? We have 130 employees we want to include in our weekly meetings and are using Zoom webinar now. Is live meeting included with Office 365 Business Premium license?
It is. Yes.
Great.
Live meetings are, and I believe that's up to 10,000 people. So way more than what you need. There is potentially a license difference for public live meetings, although in practice, I haven't seen that actually be the case. So the quick answer is yes. If you have Teams, you have the capability of doing live meetings. And there's a few caveats to that, but for your specific question at that license level, yes, live meetings are included.
We have 2 questions on review best practices for organizing chat, Teams, channels, public versus private, as well as, just helping provide a structure to each team. I know we could probably do an entire webinar just on that. And
We have a little bit.
Yeah, we have a couple other webinars.
Again, on our YouTube channel, you can watch those if you're interested.
Yeah, so maybe, Anne, I know you've done a lot of work on this. Do you want to just briefly comment on how yours are structured and how you decide public versus private?
So we, in the beginning, we created, we have an internal tech team, and that's where we created a plan for governance, and that each team would have an owner, which that they do, but that team owner is also, everyone can create a channel on the team, but they have to get approval basically from the team owner prior to creating a channel. And as far as private channels go, we have just been experimenting with those, and I've already been fielding some questions because some people made something private and they didn't mean it to be private. So I think just really, once again, it goes back to also education. But I would definitely come up with a plan for governance, and there's some resources available in Microsoft that I could throw in the chat that helps with the governance.
Let me ask you both 2 quick questions. How did you decide to structure your teams? Like, what teams did you create, and how does that correspond or map to your internal organization? You know, is it by department? Is it by project, et cetera?
We had 2 levels, which I spoke of, by department. We have our overall, all staff one, and then we have by department and by committee. And so pretty much that's how it works.
Richard, how about you?
We're the same. On our breadth of solutions side of our business, it's more by department, but our corporate steward areas side of our business is more a little bit by committee and by people's interest.
So I'll add one other quick thing to that, which extends to what you were talking about or asking about with chat as well. So chat is very organic. It's meant to not be structured. Group chats, I would say, are the same way. What I've seen is that group chats come and go. People create group chats as they need to. And for those of you that don't know, if you start a chat and you add more people to it, and you've got this group chat of 4, 5, 6, 7 people or more, you can rename that as well, and it kind of becomes this persistent thing that you can keep using. That is for more short-lived things in my experience, something that's relevant for a week or 2. You don't need to tie in other resources. You don't necessarily need to add a lot of files. You know, there are limits by how many files can be stored in a group chat, for example. When you're looking at teams, that's where I'd be a little bit more deliberate about the teams that you're creating. So it would be a matter of either around a more extended way that people need to collaborate around a topic, whether that's a department level topic or a department that needs to kind of have internal communication, or a more of an organic group of people that frequently collaborate on something, and maybe even a project or client. So I'd say that teams are kind of a group of people that need to collaborate. Channels are the way that you would divide up that communication. And by moving to a team from a group chat, you have the ability to add a lot more capabilities to it. And then private channels really are where you need to restrict information inside of that group of people to a smaller group of people that are a subset of that group of people. Hopefully that helps. Next question.
Great. So a couple questions around notifications. So one specifically in Microsoft Teams, is there a way to turn on notification for all users in the all user team and channels? And another person asked, we want to make Teams open to the organization to foster collaboration, but still keep some separation so as not to overload or overwhelm users.
So on the first one, I think what you're asking for is a way to make sure that if there's a message in an important channel, that it would show up in their feed. One thing off the top of my head is that you can, if you at the channel in that message, then it will typically show up in their feed as long as they're a member of that, channel, that group. I would say
specifically, right?
Yep, by mentioning them specifically as well. So if you have like an all company channel or all company team, and you've got a channel in that's like important communications, if you mention the team itself, that will typically send a notification. What I don't know is if you can override that to make sure that they can't change that. It may be possible with PowerShell, but that's something we can look more into. And if you like, you can reach out to us directly and we can dig into that a little more. What was the second half of that?
It was basically around wanting to enable collaboration, but not overwhelming users. So having separate teams. So I think the answer is basically private versus public, and then being able to mute certain channels.
Yeah, I think you may both have something on this. What I would say off the bat is don't make too many channels and teams to start. Keep it minimal. Start with maybe like an all company team, and then do training on how to manage your notifications. Make sure that your users understand how to customize their notifications and then what your organization's best practices are. So it kind of goes back to, if you train users not to try and hide notifications for the important communications channel, then if they are, then at least you train them not to, and you can hold them accountable on that. What would you say?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's some control that you can set at an organizational level, but for the most part, it's kind of up to the user. They've got pretty granular controls that you can go in there and set up for notifications for yourself. And like Ann has done, we've done some stream videos and created news feeds on our SharePoint side of things. We have an IT site and specifically a SharePoint site. Created those news feeds, and then of course sent those news feeds out to everyone so they get them in their email, but also just to kind of let them know, like, if you want at any time, you can go and you can not only read the news feed but also watch the videos to kind of walk you through step by step on how to set some of those notification settings for you individually, because not everybody's going to want to be notified immediately. Not everybody's going to want to be notified daily. Some people just want to get a summary now and then on some of those notifications. But at mentioning somebody or at mentioning a group definitely brings it to the forefront of your attention. Like, hey, this is
you should look at this.
Yeah, I should look at this.
Yeah, agreed. And anything you want to contribute on that?
No,
You don't have to. I'm just asking if you had any thoughts.
No, I think Richard nailed it.
All right, perfect. Any more?
One more in there. It was the first question that was asked.
We're finally getting to it.
I know. So basically, they've not rolled out Office 365 yet. So what advice can you what advice can you give to orgs looking to adopt Office 365? I've used it before, but many colleagues are very hesitant to using a cloud-based email or file sharing system. Yeah,
so there's a couple layers to that. And by that question, I'm going to assume that you're probably using Exchange on-prem then, probably not using G Suite if you're concerned about cloud email. I would say that I would start from a compliance and security standpoint. Microsoft has some great resources out there as to the security, the compliance that they've had to meet, and all of their certifications and everything else. Their cloud platform is probably the most robust out there in terms of security. You can even set with licensing, you can set, they have an option called Lockbox, where you can restrict Microsoft's access even to your tenant as well with certain licensing levels. But you can they will sign off on a business association agreement as well if that's necessary to you in your particular client environment. In my experience over the last 15, 20 years in IT, there are more issues, related to data integrity with on-prem, but on the other hand, user identities become all the more important in the cloud and protecting those user identities. So I would say if you're concerned, you would want to start from a security perspective, look at the security controls that are available to you. And I would also make sure that you're implementing multi-factor authentication and some of those other technical tools that you can use to secure the environment right from the get-go. MFA alone and making sure that it's set up correctly is probably one of the most powerful tools to make sure that is secured. I would say that the power of being able to access that information and those files from everywhere and eliminating the need to create, all these VPNs and workarounds, oftentimes that's a compromise itself. Moving to cloud-based file sharing can become much more secure, because if you're sharing the files through SharePoint, for example, with external collaborators, you have a lot more control over those files than if you were sending those by email. So if you don't have cloud file storage and you don't have cloud collaboration tools, then your users still need to collaborate. They still need to share those files. They still need to access them remotely. And typically they're going to be working around the limitations of your system rather than being enabled by it. Anything you guys wanted to add on that?
I would totally agree. I mean, between legal hold and data governance policies, some of the other, maybe a little bit less used by some tools as part of that platform are the check-in, check-out, the recycle bin for the 30, 60, 90 day restore, and even being able to roll back to an early revision if somebody happens to do something, on accident. You can instantly undo it.
Yep. Yeah, I just used that yesterday where I needed to go back and see when I made a change to an Excel document, I could go back to that previous revision and see what cell I changed and change it back again on the original document. Yep. But yeah, I would say that there are definitely ways that you can set it up to be more secure. It can definitely be HIPAA, PCI, DFARS. They have tenants that are even more restricted if you have particular compliance requirements. They have the Gov level Office 365 and higher yet. So if it's good enough for the DoD, I think it's probably good enough for most of our viewers out there. So yeah, with that said, is there anything else we wanted to add? No, I think we're all set. Thanks again to Richard and Ann for joining us. I think it was really great to hear from you and how things have gone. So hopefully you found this helpful, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks, everybody.